The CEO Max was kidnapped by his grandmother, who tied him to a stretcher, drugged him to immobilize him, and even taped his mouth shut. A girl named Vivian Vance happened to pass by, and Max's grandmother suddenly clung to her leg, begging her to marry her grandson. The grandmother explained that her grandson was in a vegetative state, and with her own time running out, her last wish was to see him married. Max cast a glance at Vivian, thinking his grandmother's request was absurd and that this girl would never agree. Seeing Vivian's hesitation, his grandmother pretended to strangle him, threatening to take him down with her. Vivian hurriedly intervened, saying she was willing to marry him. Her grandmother had been pushing her to marry, but she couldn't find a suitable partner, so she figured marrying this strange man, a vegetative state, at least meant loyalty and no risk of cheating. Overjoyed, the grandmother urged them to register their marriage that very day. Since Max was in a vegetative state, they took the wedding photo while lying on the ground, which made for a comical scene. After getting the marriage certificate, Max left the country immediately due to urgent work in the US. A year later, the CEO finally returned. His bodyguards gathered at the airport to welcome him back, and he wanted to treat his wife well and make up for his absence. Coincidentally, Vivian worked in Max's company as a secretary, but the spoiled Rose ordered her to mop the floors, considering herself Max's future wife and feeling entitled to boss Vivian around. Rose intentionally made things difficult, but Vivian didn't back down and ended up soaking Rose's expensive dress with the mop. Furious, Rose tried to strangle Vivian, but Max's secretary intervened, telling them to welcome the CEO. When Max arrived, he and Vivian exchanged a long look, both feeling that the other looked familiar but unable to place each other. Max appointed Vivian as his personal secretary, leaving Vivian stunned and Rose green with envy. The CEO decided to visit his wife that evening, so he asked Vivian to prepare some gifts that women might like. She carefully prepared many gifts, and her boss was pleased. When he arrived at his wife's residence, he called her, only to hear a man's voice calling her baby. Heartbroken, Max assumed his wife was cheating on him, threw the flowers to the ground, and left. In reality, the man on the phone was Jack, Vivian's childhood friend, whose girlfriend was actually Alice, not Vivian. The grandmother had previously told Vivian that her grandson miraculously recovered on their wedding day, but since the husband had made no contact in a year, Vivian saw him as irresponsible and refused to forgive him. Hearing that Max had hired a female secretary, the grandmother, unaware that this secretary was actually Vivian, grew worried he might stray. The next day, she stormed into Max's office intending to confront the mistress and found Rose posing seductively. Furious, the grandmother kicked Rose, who initially thought it was Max and turned around happily, only to see an old lady who berated her as a shameless vixen. The grandmother even struck Rose with her cane, knocking her out and dragging her out of the office. The employees were stunned by the scene and gathered around, laughing at Rose. Humiliated, Rose swore revenge on Max's grandmother. Max began to suspect he might have misunderstood his wife, so he planned to visit her again. He took Vivian along to buy gifts. With more than a dozen gift bags in her hands, she was completely overwhelmed. But she secretly envied the CEO's wife for having such a thoughtful husband, unaware that she herself was his wife. Meanwhile, Max's grandmother angrily called him, revealing that his wife's name was Vivian Vance. Shocked, Max realized that his secretary was, in fact, his wife. Elated, he picked up flowers and a diamond ring and set off to see her immediately. However, he got stuck in traffic, so he decided to walk. He started running with the bouquet in hand, reminiscing about the happy moments he had shared with Vivian. When he reached her building, he ran into Vivian on her way down the stairs. She almost fell, but he caught her. Max glanced at the ruined flowers in his hand. Embarrassed, Vivian apologized and rushed off. Just then, Max saw a man knocking on the door of Unit 401, calling out, "Vivian, my wife, open up." A woman answered, and they looked very close. Knowing his wife lived in 401, Max assumed this unfaithful woman was his real wife, and his secretary just happened to have the same name. Angry and disgusted, he threw the flowers away. Meanwhile, Vivian thought her boss was so considerate, unlike her estranged husband, whom she cursed to step in dog poop on his way out. Right after, Max did just that, worsening his mood. He informed his grandmother that Vivian had cheated on him and planned to divorce her immediately. Though the grandmother didn't believe it, Jack answered when she called Vivian's phone, reinforcing her suspicions. Later, one of Max's friends called Vivian, informing her that Max was drunk at a bar and asking her to pick him up. After taking him home, she noticed he was feverish. She went to make him a hangover remedy, but was pulled into his arms. He asked if she lived in Unit 401, suspecting the coincidence of their names was too much. Vivian lied, saying she didn't live there and was only working part-time, then explained her financial struggles. Moved, Max decided to give her a raise. She had just made the hangover soup when the doorbell rang. She thought it was his wife returning and, afraid of being misunderstood, panicked and accidentally fell onto Max, even touching his chest. She opened the door to find Max's private doctor and bodyguard. The doctor revealed that Max was allergic to alcohol, and the boss warned Vivian not to disclose this or face severe consequences. Though annoyed, she held back her temper for the sake of her salary. The doctor asked Max to take off his clothes and told Vivian to apply the medicine for him. The shy boss wanted his bodyguard to do it instead, but the bodyguard's hand was injured, making it inconvenient. Vivian took a cotton swab and began applying the medicine to Max, but he felt a bit embarrassed and ordered the bodyguard to escort her out immediately. Max soon drafted a divorce agreement, demanding $1 million compensation from his wife for emotional damages. He invited Vivian to attend a party with him, where he accidentally learned she was already married. After the event, he wanted to drive her home, but saw Jack picking her up, mistaking him for her husband and feeling a pang of jealousy. Max's mother hoped that he would marry Rose. Rose seized the opportunity to tell her that Vivian was seducing Max, prompting her to team up with Rose to target Vivian. The next morning, rumors circulated in the company about Vivian's promiscuous life, with photos showing her and Jack together. Rose had orchestrated this by snapping photos when Jack had caught Vivian from falling. Satisfied, Rose spilled hot water on Vivian, warning her to stay away from Max. Vivian pleaded with the CEO to investigate the rumor, but he, feeling jealous, coldly told her to resolve it herself in 2 hours, though he secretly ordered the tech department to help her. Vivian discovered Rose was the source of the rumors and had her arrested. As Rose struggled, Vivian slapped her twice before the police took her away. Vivian later learned that Max had secretly helped her and felt deeply touched. She recalled a traumatic experience from years ago when she was nearly assaulted, only to be blamed for seducing the perpetrator, leading to her nearly being expelled from school. Her then boyfriend, William, doubted her innocence and broke up with her, while Jack defended her by fighting William. Since then, she'd lost faith in love, which led her to agree to marry a stranger. During an out-of-town business trip with Max, his mother planted a spy who warned Vivian to stay away from Max. The CEO overheard this and promptly fired the spy, warning her not to trouble Vivian again. The next day, Max was almost struck by a falling tree branch, but Vivian saved him, injuring her arm in the process. Max had his personal doctor come immediately to treat her. Late that night, the spy returned, pleading with Vivian to help her get reinstated. In her desperation, she grabbed Vivian's injured arm, causing her to cry out in pain. Just then, Max appeared. He ordered the bodyguard to take the spy away, then carried Vivian back to the room, instructing the doctor to stop her bleeding as soon as possible. Upon returning from the business trip, Vivian received divorce papers from her husband demanding $1 million in damages, which only deepened her resentment. Vivian agreed to divorce Max, the CEO, but refused to pay him the $1 million compensation. After she signed the divorce papers, the CEO's lawyer informed her that the formalities would be completed a month later. Max, unhappy about having to wait a month for the divorce to be finalized, was eager to sever ties with his estranged wife, not realizing that his wife was actually his secretary, Vivian. When Max heard that Vivian had been in a car accident, he rushed to the hospital, only to see her in an intimate moment with her friend Jack. Misunderstanding that this man was her husband, Max left feeling hurt. Later, he drowned his sorrows at a bar, and his friend Joe informed Vivian that Max's wife had been unfaithful, encouraging her to seize the opportunity to win Max's heart. Vivian firmly denied any romantic intentions towards the CEO, unaware that he was standing right behind her and overhearing her words. Vivian brought Max back to his home, made him a hangover soup, and then prepared to leave. But he grabbed her hand, asking her to stay the night. Startled, she broke free and asked him what he was planning. Max explained that it was hard to get a cab at that hour and suggested she stay in the guest room. Realizing her misunderstanding, Vivian awkwardly said goodnight and rushed into the room. The next morning, Vivian cooked 2 bowls of noodles. Max took one bite and, finding it delicious, devoured the whole bowl. The housekeeper praised Vivian's cooking skills, commenting that her husband was lucky to have such a wonderful wife. Hearing this, Max's good mood instantly soured with jealousy, and he walked away with a dark expression. Later, Max's sister Lisa arrived and, mistaking Vivian for her brother's unfaithful wife, lashed out at her, calling her shameless and even pushing her, telling her to get lost. Enraged, Max demanded that Lisa apologize to Vivian. It was only then that Lisa realized this woman was her brother's secretary, and she had scolded the wrong person. She held Vivian's hand and offered a sincere apology, and Vivian forgave her. Grateful, Lisa declared that she would treat Vivian as a good friend from then on. Meanwhile, Rose had been released from prison early due to her brother's connections. She immediately came to visit Max, but he ignored her. It turned out that Lisa had brought Rose over as they were friends. Rose feigned friendliness with Lisa, but was only using her to get close to Max. On her way home, Vivian was kidnapped and brought to a mansion where she met Max's mother, Bella. Bella had her followed and had discovered that Vivian went to Max's house right after signing the divorce papers with her ex-husband. Bella had also investigated Vivian's past and misunderstood that Vivian had seduced a married man in college. Bella threatened Vivian to resign and leave the city, or she would ruin her reputation. But Vivian refused to back down to such bullying. Bella then told Rose that Vivian was actually Max's wife, so they needed to prevent the couple from learning the truth. Bella's henchman warned Vivian not to tell Max about this, threatening to harm her grandmother if she did. So, when Max showed concern for her, Vivian remained silent about the threats. However, Max apologized to her because he had learned about his mother's actions. He wanted to comfort her, but restrained himself. Max and Vivian joined friends for a role-playing detective game. In the game, Vivian and Max's friend Joe were set to play a married couple, which made Max jealous. Sensing his jealousy, Joe offered to swap roles so Max and Vivian could play husband and wife. While sitting together, they both started to feel hot and realized the door was suddenly locked. Max suspected they had been drugged with an aphrodisiac. Vivian reflected that if she were with Joe as originally planned, the consequences would be disastrous, as someone likely intended to set her up for a scandal and force her to resign. Max pinned Vivian down on the couch, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. But just as he was about to kiss her, he stopped himself and slapped his own face, resolving not to take advantage of her and vowing to respect her. Max told her to stay calm and wait for his doctor to arrive, then moved to sit on the opposite end of the couch to keep his distance. His mother, Bella, realizing her plan had failed, panicked and quickly made preparations to leave the country, knowing her son would not spare her. The CEO's doctor and bodyguard arrived, and he instructed the doctor to check on Vivian first. The doctor examined Vivian and noticed that she had scratched her arm raw in her efforts to restrain herself. A month later, the official date for Max and Vivian's divorce arrived, and they agreed to meet in the afternoon. However, Vivian received a call informing her that her grandmother was critically ill in the hospital. Max's lawyer called to urge Vivian, but she was busy visiting her grandmother and stood Max up. Vivian's uncle and aunt, eager to secure the inheritance, refused to spend money on her grandmother's treatment. Furious, Vivian rebuked them, but they mocked her, accusing her of being a seductress who allegedly tried to seduce a married man in college. She called the police, and her uncle and aunt were arrested for causing a disturbance and defamation. Her grandmother, wishing to see Vivian's husband, remained unaware of their impending divorce. To keep her grandmother's spirits up, Vivian decided to postpone the divorce. Max, upon learning about Vivian's grandmother's illness, transferred a sum for medical expenses and agreed to delay the divorce. Vivian asked Max to visit her grandmother, and he agreed, but said he didn't want to see her at the hospital, so she promised to stay out of sight. The next day, Max visited her grandmother with gifts, and the elderly lady was charmed by his good looks. However, Max accidentally revealed their impending divorce, making her grandmother feel guilty, thinking that her pressure to marry had caused the failed marriage. She supported Vivian's decision to divorce, wanting her to find true happiness. Consequently, Vivian and Max agreed to finalize the divorce the following day. On the day of the divorce, Max arrived at the Civil Affairs office, only to notice Vivian at the entrance. His lawyer pointed out that the woman in the business suit was his wife. Shocked, Max called his wife's phone, watching as Vivian answered it. He took out their marriage certificate and verified their wedding photo, finally realizing that Vivian was indeed his wife. He refused the divorce, and when Vivian learned this, she stormed off angrily. Max investigated Vivian's past and discovered the hardships she had endured. Her father had passed away when she was 5. She was almost assaulted by a male neighbor in college who then falsely accused her of seduction. And her uncle and aunt had mistreated her. Max ordered that the male neighbor be driven to bankruptcy, and her uncle and aunt to be permanently detained. He then contacted the world's top medical team to treat Vivian's grandmother. Vivian found the long-lost marriage certificate, but when she opened it, she was shocked to discover that her husband was her boss, Max. Just then, he arrived and apologized, arranging to meet with her the next day. Although Vivian maintained a cold demeanor, she secretly felt happy and anticipated their meeting. A year later, Vivian lay in Max's arms, caressing his face. He suddenly grabbed her hand, kissed it, and then playfully pinned her down, attempting to kiss her but getting pushed away. Meanwhile, Lisa and both grandmothers were peeking through the doorway, only to be caught. Lisa suspected that her brother had a problem with his sexual function, as they hadn't conceived after a year of marriage. Just then, Vivian suddenly felt nauseous and rushed to the bathroom. Lisa excitedly announced to the grandmothers that Vivian was pregnant. And so, this lovely family was on their way to happiness.